A man does not fall in love simply because he is fascinated, nor does he stay because he's constantly impressed. He becomes emotionally attached in a space where he feels he can lay down his inner armor without fear of being judged or misunderstood. The foundation of every deep connection is not passion, nor mystery, nor beauty. It is safety. When a man senses that he is safe in your presence, not just physically but emotionally, something within him begins to relax. The weight he carries from years of silent battles, from expectations, from the constant need to prove himself, all of it begins to loosen its grip. And in that stillness, something rare begins to grow, attachment that is genuine, not driven by need or fear, but by peace. To understand emotional safety, you must see beyond appearances. Every man, no matter how confident or disciplined he may seem, carries a hidden vulnerability. It is not weakness, it is simply the part of him that the world has never cared to hold gently. Society teaches him to suppress, to perform, to protect, but rarely to open. So when he encounters a space where he feels no need to perform, where his silence is accepted, where his confusion is not mocked, he experiences a quiet revelation. For perhaps the first time, he can breathe without pretending. That is where attachment begins, not in words, not in declarations, but in the invisible comfort of being emotionally understood. A woman who understands this does not chase emotion. She creates an environment where it naturally arises. Her presence does not provoke urgency. It invites calm. She listens not to reply, but to feel. She does not demand that he reveals everything at once. She allows his truth to unfold at its own rhythm. Because emotional safety cannot be forced, it must be nurtured through patience and sincerity. When she speaks, her tone does not seek to dominate, it seeks to harmonize. And in that harmony, a man finds what he cannot find in the noise of the world: peace. Men often grow up in spaces where emotional expression is punished or ignored. They learn to bury their softness under logic, to cover their tenderness with strength. Yet, the more they hide, the more disconnected they feel. Emotional safety is the bridge that reconnects him to himself through another. It is the unseen hand that says, "You can be exactly as you are right now, and that is enough." When he feels that truth deeply, his guard lowers. The attachment that forms then is not a strategy or desire, it is the heart recognizing its home. When a man feels emotionally safe, he does not need constant validation. He no longer plays games of control or distance. His attention deepens, his communication softens, his patience grows. He begins to show up, not because he has to, but because he wants to. You will notice it not in grand gestures, but in subtle acts, the way he remembers small details, the way he listens more closely, the way he becomes present in your silence. He becomes anchored. And in a world that constantly pulls his attention outward, that anchoring is the rarest form of attachment. But emotional safety is not created by words alone. It is formed by energy, by the way you hold space. If you are reactive, he contracts. If you are calm, he opens. If you criticize when he's vulnerable, he retreats into silence. But if you accept him in his confusion, he starts to find clarity through your stillness. Emotional safety requires awareness, because it is not only about how you speak to him, it's about how you respond to his moments of weakness. When he sees that his darker emotions do not scare you away, when he feels that you don't use his openness against him, he begins to associate your presence with relief. It is relief that breeds attachment. Relief from judgment, relief from pressure, relief from the endless need to prove his worth. When he senses that he can simply exist beside you, not as a role, not as an image, but as himself, the bond becomes sacred. His heart, which once belonged to discipline and survival, now begins to belong to connection. He doesn't say it in words, he shows it in consistency. Emotional safety transforms attraction into devotion and desire into loyalty. Understand this. Emotional safety is not softness without boundaries. It is not losing yourself in order to make him comfortable. It is strength expressed with grace. A calm presence is not passive, it is deeply powerful. Because only someone who has mastered their own emotions can create safety for another. The person who reacts less controls more. The person who listens deeply influences more. The person who remains stable in the face of chaos teaches the other how to return to balance. Emotional safety begins with the self before it extends outward. When you are at peace within, your energy becomes a sanctuary for those who enter your space. In truth, men do not crave perfection. They crave peace. They are not drawn to the loudest, The most beautiful or the most charming presence, they are drawn to the one where they can drop their defenses. When a man senses that he can reveal his imperfections and still be valued, he becomes loyal in ways that words cannot describe. His emotional attachment deepens, not because you gave him excitement, but because you gave him rest. And rest is something the world rarely gives. The art of creating emotional safety lies in simplicity. To listen without assumption, to observe without reacting, to love without demanding. A man becomes emotionally attached when he feels that he can stand beside you and not feel small. When he feels that his silence is not a threat to your security, when his distance is not met with panic, but with understanding, he begins to trust the bond more than his fears. It is this trust that ties his emotions to yours. Not through force, not through seduction, but through stillness. In that stillness, the connection matures. It ceases to be about control and becomes about coexistence. It becomes a reflection of mutual peace rather than emotional dependence. For the one thing that makes every man emotionally attached is not intensity, not mystery, not even love as we commonly define it. It is the sanctuary of emotional safety, where the heart no longer needs to hide behind strength, and the soul finally feels seen without being exposed. Attachment is not born from ownership, nor from the desire to control or claim. It emerges from the quiet strength of presence, from the energy of being fully there, not to take, but to witness. Presence has a weight that words can never carry. It is the silent assurance that says, you are seen, you are heard, you are safe. Possession, on the other hand, comes from fear, the fear of losing, the fear of not being enough, the fear of emptiness. A bond rooted in fear always crumbles. But a bond formed through presence grows deeper, stronger, and freer with time. When you are present with someone, you stop reaching for what you can get from them. You start to experience who they are. You listen differently. You see beyond behavior. You begin to feel the subtleties in their silence, the language that exists beneath words. Presence allows you to meet a person where they truly are, not where your expectations want them to be. Possession, however, tries to mold, shape, and confine. It says, be this for me. Presence says, be who you are, and I will meet you there. A man does not become emotionally attached because he is possessed or controlled. He becomes attached because he feels that your presence carries peace, not pressure. When he feels that he can exist beside you without being demanded to perform, something in him begins to soften. The walls that once kept him distant begin to lower. He begins to trust not because you hold him tightly, but because you hold him gently. This is the paradox. The less you try to own him, the more he wants to stay. Presence is not simply being physically near. Many sit beside one another yet remain miles apart emotionally. True presence requires stillness, an undistracted awareness that is grounded in the moment. When you are fully present, your energy communicates more than your words. You create a field where another person feels that time slows down, where their nervous system relaxes, where they feel accepted in their truth. This kind of connection does not need constant reassurance because it feeds the soul, not the ego. Possession cannot give peace. It lives on anxiety. It seeks to hold tighter when it senses distance, and it demands proof of love when it feels uncertainty. The more it grasps, the more it loses, because what it fears most, loss, is created by its own tension. When a person feels possessed, they begin to pull away to reclaim freedom. But when they feel presence, they lean in to experience more of that calm. Presence is the invisible invitation that keeps love alive without force. Men, by nature, are often sensitive to control. They may comply outwardly, but internally they resist anything that makes them feel confined. When a man feels possessed, his instincts tell him to retreat to protect his autonomy. But when he feels presence, soft, open, and undemanding, he begins to trust. He realizes that he can still be free and still be connected. This realization creates emotional attachment because it merges two powerful needs, the desire for connection and the need for freedom. Presence is what allows both to coexist. To cultivate presence, one must learn to silence the inner noise. The mind that constantly wants to predict, control, and interpret destroys presence. True presence requires surrender, the ability to simply be with what is. When you are with someone, let go of the need to plan what to say next or to read what every gesture means. Just be there. Look, listen, breathe. Allow the space between you to be alive with awareness. This kind of listening heals. It shows the other person that you are not trying to change them, you are trying to understand them. When a man feels this kind of awareness, he begins to associate your energy with peace. He feels that he can rest around you without having to defend or perform. Your presence becomes like still water, reflecting, calm and accepting. It is in this atmosphere that emotional intimacy grows naturally. Possession cannot create that. Possession speaks too loudly. It interrupts, it demands, it projects. Presence, however, listens in silence and understands without intrusion. There is a deep truth here. What you try to possess, you eventually lose. What you are present with, you naturally harmonize with. When you hold someone with the intention of control, they feel your grasp and instinctively pull away. But when you hold them with awareness, without expectation, they feel the freedom to move closer. Because presence does not suffocate, it liberates. It says, you are free to be you, and I am free to stay. That freedom builds trust. Trust builds connection. Connection builds attachment. In the quiet exchange between two people who are truly present, there is no competition, no agenda, no fear. There is only an openness that says, I am here. That statement, when felt through action, through calm energy, through undivided attention, creates a sacred bond. A man feels that energy deeply because it is rare. In a world full of distractions, presence is the greatest form of affection. It tells him that he matters, that his essence is being received, not just his words or his actions. To be present means to drop comparison, to let go of control, to stop replaying the past and predicting the future. Presence is the art of living in truth, and truth always feels safe. Possession, on the other hand, is driven by illusion. It believes that holding on tightly guarantees love, but in truth, it only guarantees exhaustion. Love grows where space exists, and space can only exist where presence replaces control. Presence creates an invisible bridge between hearts, a bridge that does not require words or explanations. It is felt in stillness, in breath, in the quiet confidence that does not chase. It is not the loud declaration of, you are mine, but the humble offering of, I am here. It is this offering that makes a man stay long after passion fades, because presence feeds something deeper than desire. It feeds the soul. When your presence becomes his calm, when your silence holds understanding instead of judgment, when your eyes listen more than your words, a man begins to attach not to your appearance, not to your role, but to your energy. That energy tells him that he can be himself and still be loved. Possession may win attention for a moment, but presence wins devotion for a lifetime. Because in the end, what every heart longs for is not to be owned, but to be met fully, deeply, and without condition. To truly connect with someone, you must learn to see beyond the noise of reaction. Most people listen to respond, not to understand. They observe to analyze, not to feel. But real connection, the kind that roots itself deep within the heart, requires a still mind, a mind that can see without labeling, hear without assuming, and feel without the need to be right. Understanding before judgment is not just an act of kindness, it is a form of wisdom. It is what transforms conflict into compassion, distance into intimacy, and confusion into clarity. Every man carries a story within him that he rarely tells. Beneath his actions, there are layers of silence. Beneath his confidence, there may be pain. Beneath his indifference, there may be fear. The one who learns to understand him before judging him becomes a mirror in which his truth can safely appear. When he senses that you seek to understand, not to accuse, he begins to open, not out of weakness, but out of relief. Because being understood is one of the rarest experiences in a world that moves too fast to listen. Judgment closes the heart, understanding opens it. Judgment speaks from ego, understanding speaks from awareness. When you judge, you reduce a person to a single moment, a single action, a single expression. You stop seeing the full picture. You stop seeing their humanity. But when you understand, you step back and look deeper. You begin to ask not, what is wrong with him? But what is happening within him? That shift of perception changes everything. You stop reacting to his behavior and start responding to his reality. A man who feels constantly judged becomes guarded. He hides behind silence or anger, not because he wants to distance himself, but because he does not feel safe being seen. He learns to edit his emotions to filter his truth, but a man who feels understood begins to breathe differently. His tone changes. His body relaxes. His eyes soften. He starts to communicate with honesty instead of defense. Understanding disarms him more than affection ever could. It reaches him where logic cannot, in the emotional space where he has long felt unseen. To understand someone, you must first quiet your own inner noise. If you are filled with assumptions, reactions, or past wounds, you will project rather than perceive. Understanding requires presence, a still awareness that observes without rush. When he speaks, listen not just to his words, but to what his tone reveals. When he is silent, sense the emotion behind that silence. Sometimes what he cannot say holds more truth than what he can. Understanding is an art of attention, not interpretation. It is patience made visible. Most people want to be right more than they want to be kind. They want to win the argument rather than learn the reason. But when you prioritize understanding, you are no longer trying to win, you are trying to see. You stop treating the other person as an opponent and start seeing them as a mirror reflecting unhealed parts of yourself. This shift softens your energy. It replaces blame with empathy. And empathy is the bridge that reconnects two hearts that have drifted apart through misunderstanding. Understanding before judgment does not mean ignoring truth. It does not mean accepting disrespect or excusing harmful behavior. It means seeking to understand this why before reacting to the as what. It means realizing that pain often disguises itself as anger, that fear often wears the mask of pride, that confusion often hides beneath detachment. When you recognize the emotion beneath the behavior, you stop fighting the symptom and begin to heal the cause. In moments of disagreement, pause before reacting, breathe before speaking. Ask yourself, am I seeing the truth, or am I seeing my interpretation of it? That question can dissolve entire layers of misunderstanding. Most conflicts are not caused by what was said, but by what was assumed. When you learn to listen with clarity instead of reaction, communication becomes a path of peace instead of a battlefield of egos. A man grows emotionally attached to the one who listens without judgment because her presence becomes a rare refuge. The world expects him to perform, to act strong, to hide his doubts. But in the space of understanding, he can reveal the parts of himself he usually hides. He can show his confusion without shame, his fear without ridicule, his weakness without rejection. The one who understands him does not fix him, she sees him. And being seen without being judged heals more deeply than being loved with conditions. Understanding is not agreement, it is awareness. You can understand someone deeply without justifying their behavior. But to reach that state, you must let go of pride. You must be willing to feel rather than to prove. In stillness, you begin to see that every action, no matter how confusing, comes from an inner cause, a thought, a wound, a belief, or a fear. When you see that, your heart softens. You respond with wisdom instead of resistance, and that wisdom creates safety. Safety builds trust. Trust builds attachment. A person who is understood feels less alone. They begin to lower their defenses because they no longer have to protect themselves from being misread. When a man feels that you are trying to understand his inner world instead of reshaping it, his heart naturally leans closer. Understanding gives permission for honesty to exist. It allows truth to flow freely without fear of punishment. It becomes the foundation upon which intimacy can grow without resistance. In truth, judgment separates, understanding unites. Judgment says, you should be different. Understanding says, I see why you are the way you are. Judgment tries to change the other. Understanding changes the atmosphere. In an atmosphere of understanding, the heart relaxes. The walls built from fear begin to dissolve. What once was hidden begins to surface. And from that space, real connection begins, quiet, deep, and enduring. To understand before judging is to love before reacting. It is to choose curiosity over criticism. It is to remind yourself that what you see in another is often a reflection of what is unresolved within you. When you understand this, your relationships change. You stop demanding perfection. You start practicing patience. You begin to replace assumptions with presence and conflict with awareness. Understanding before judgment is the discipline of the heart, the ability to see someone through the eyes of empathy rather than the eyes of ego. It is not weakness. It is strength refined. It requires restraint, humility, and compassion. It asks you to slow down, to feel, and to remember that every soul is fighting a battle unseen. And when you meet that battle not with judgment, but with understanding, you offer healing, not just to the other, but to yourself. A trust is not born in a single moment of passion, nor in a grand promise spoken with intensity. It is built slowly, quietly, through repetition, through actions that align with words, through presence that remains steady even when emotions shift. Consistency is the language of truth. It speaks without shouting, it reassures without convincing. It is through consistency that a man begins to believe, not because he is told, but because he has seen, felt, and experienced reliability over time. When the outer world changes, consistency becomes the calm center where love takes root and grows into sacred trust. Every man carries within him a quiet awareness of uncertainty. Life has taught him that words can deceive, appearances can shift, and people can change when tested. So he watches patterns more than promises. He listens to energy more than explanations. What he trusts is not what is said once, but what is shown repeatedly. A single act of care touches him, but repeated acts of presence make him stay. Consistency tells him that your intention is not temporary, that your loyalty is not conditional, that your care does not vanish when convenience fades. Consistency is not about perfection, it is about dependability. It is about being rooted enough to stay centered when emotions rise and fall. Anyone can show up when things are easy, but when you remain steady through the changing seasons, when your tone remains calm during tension, when your kindness does not disappear in disagreement, when your warmth does not depend on his performance, he feels something rare, he feels safety. And that safety becomes the foundation of trust that no fleeting passion can replace. Inconsistency breeds confusion, and confusion breeds distance. When a man never knows which version of you he will meet, the calm or the reactive, the patient or the critical, he cannot rest. His nervous system stays alert, waiting for instability. But when your energy remains balanced and predictable, even in silence, his heart learns that it can relax. He learns that he can show up without fear of emotional punishment. In that space, trust begins to deepen naturally. Trust does not ask for intensity, it asks for rhythm. It is like the steady beat of a drum that guides the body through chaos. Consistency is that rhythm. It teaches the mind that it can rely on something greater than words. The quiet repetition of truth expressed through action. A consistent presence says, I am not here to impress you for a moment. I am here to stand beside you through moments. That steadiness is what makes attachment sacred. It transforms a connection from fragile to unbreakable. A man who feels consistency begins to open in layers. The first layer is comfort. He feels that he no longer has to watch for instability. The second layer is vulnerability. He begins to share what he usually hides. The third layer is devotion. He invests emotionally because he trusts that the ground beneath him will not collapse. That process cannot be rushed. It unfolds at the pace of reliability. One steady moment after another, like drops of water carving stone, consistency builds the shape of sacred trust. Consistency also reveals self-discipline. It shows emotional maturity. It shows that your peace does not depend on his behavior, but on your own alignment. This is what draws a man closer. Not words of reassurance, but the quiet example of inner balance. When you are consistent in your peace, you become an anchor. The more unpredictable life becomes, the more he values the steadiness you embody, because your consistency teaches him what stability feels like, and once he feels it, he does not want to lose it. To be consistent means to act with awareness rather than reaction. It means that when challenges arise, you respond with intention instead of impulse. It means that you communicate with clarity even when emotions try to cloud understanding. A man observes not only what you say, but how you handle what shakes you. If you can remain calm in storms, gentle in frustration, and present in distance, he learns that your connection is real, not conditional on comfort, but grounded in depth. That depth is what makes trust sacred. There is a quiet power in showing up the same way today, tomorrow, and the day after. It doesn't mean you never change or grow. It means your core remains stable as you evolve. People who are inconsistent may shine briefly, but they burn out quickly. Consistency, on the other hand, glows with endurance. It doesn't rush to prove. It doesn't demand attention. It simply is, like the sunrise that always returns, like the tide that always moves with rhythm. A man who feels that rhythm begins to mirror it. He starts to reflect your steadiness because consistency teaches through presence, not persuasion. In relationships, trust is often broken not by betrayal, but by unpredictability. When words are not followed by actions, when moods change without reason, when affection turns to withdrawal without explanation, doubt grows. Doubt corrodes connection. But when a person's energy, attention, and care remain consistent, Doubt has no soil to grow in. Trust then becomes not an effort but a natural state of being. The mind no longer questions, the heart no longer defends, because both have found evidence of reliability. Consistency does not mean suppressing emotion. It means channeling it wisely. It means expressing without destruction, loving without condition, and showing care without performance. It is the ability to remain aligned with your principles regardless of circumstance. That alignment becomes a signal to others that you can be trusted because you trust yourself. Self-consistency is the root of relational consistency. A person who is internally scattered cannot offer stability to another, but the one who is grounded within becomes a sanctuary for those around them. A man feels emotionally attached to the person who makes him feel stable, not through control, but through dependable energy. When your words match your actions, when your promises are met with follow-through, when your emotional tone remains steady even when tested, he learns that your presence is not fleeting. He begins to associate your consistency with peace. Peace is rare, and once experienced, it becomes unforgettable. That is how sacred trust is built, not in intensity, but in reliability. In the silence between two people who trust each other, there is no anxiety about tomorrow. There is no fear of change because consistency has proven that even if circumstances shift, integrity will remain. Sacred trust grows in that silence. It grows in every promise kept, in every calm conversation during chaos, in every moment you chose patience over reaction. Consistency turns love into sanctuary and presence into devotion. It turns fleeting affection into something eternal. A steady rhythm that beats quietly beneath every word, every glance, every shared breath. A love can begin in a moment. A glance, a spark, a feeling that stirs something deep within the heart. But respect is built through time, through truth, through observation. Love can awaken passion, but respect awakens trust. A man may fall in love with your beauty, your energy, your mystery, but he stays, he commits, he devotes when he feels respected. Because love touches emotion, but respect touches identity. It affirms his worth, not just his role. It tells him that who he is, not what he provides, is seen and valued. Respect becomes the soil in which love matures and becomes sacred. Many believe love alone is enough to hold two souls together. But love without respect turns unstable, easily shaken by emotion. Love says, I feel for you. Respect says, I honor you. Love can exist even in chaos, but respect cannot survive without inner alignment. A man who is loved yet disrespected feels torn apart, loved for his presence, yet dismissed for his essence. He may remain for a time, but his spirit withdraws. Because the masculine energy at its core thrives not on adoration but on honor. When he feels respected, he becomes devoted. When he feels disrespected, he begins to disappear in silence. Respect is not obedience nor submission. It is recognition. It is the silent acknowledgement of another's space, journey, and truth. To respect a man means to see his path, to understand that his pace, his struggles, and his silence all carry meaning. It means you do not try to control his process, but instead trust it. Respect says, I see your direction and I will not interfere with it. That energy builds a foundation stronger than any words of love, because it tells him that he can exist beside you without losing himself. A man can sense when he is respected without being told. It is reflected in tone, in patience, in how you respond to his boundaries. It is not shown through flattery or compliance, but through awareness. The awareness that he too has an inner world, that his emotions are valid even if they express differently than yours. Respect is quiet. It does not need to prove. It does not need to dominate. It holds space for difference and finds harmony instead of control. When you respect a man, you do not demand him to think or feel like you. You learn his rhythm. You notice when he needs silence, and you do not interpret it as distance. You sense when he retreats, and you allow it without chasing. You understand that his stillness is not rejection, but restoration. That understanding builds safety, not only for him, but for the connection itself. Because respect says, I trust your process even when I do not fully understand it. And in that trust, emotional attachment begins to grow. Love may speak loudly, but respect listens deeply. Love wants to express, respect wants to understand. When the two meet, connection becomes whole. But when love exists without respect, it becomes one-sided. It becomes about wanting to be loved, rather than wanting to honor. Respect shifts the focus from desire to dignity. It transforms relationships from emotional consumption to mutual elevation. A man who feels respected feels safe to lead, to share, to surrender his vulnerability. He does not need to guard himself because he knows his essence will not be diminished. There is a sacred stillness in respect. It does not rush to fix or to prove. It allows space for imperfection. It accepts difference without resentment. A relationship built on respect can endure storms because it is not attached to control. It is anchored in recognition. Even when passion fades or words fall silent, respect keeps the connection alive. It becomes the invisible current that carries two souls through change without losing alignment. To love someone deeply, but without respect, is to love only what they give you, not who they are. It is to love for comfort, not for truth. Respect, however, demands awareness. It asks you to see the person beyond your expectations. It reminds you that no soul exists to complete another, but to walk beside it. When you respect a man, you do not try to mold him into the version you prefer. You support him in becoming who he already is meant to be. That kind of acceptance makes him emotionally attached, not through need, but through reverence. Respect is shown through consistency, tone, and the way you speak of him when he is not present. It is revealed when you listen rather than lecture, when you express disagreement without degradation, when you hold your ground without attacking his. To respect someone does not mean to always agree, but to disagree with grace. It means you never use your words to diminish his spirit, because once respect is broken, love struggles to survive. Love can forgive, but it rarely forgets the sting of dishonor. In a world where so many demand to be heard, respect is the art of silence. It is the decision to listen before assuming, to understand before reacting. It is strength disguised as calm. The person who practices respect becomes powerful, not because they dominate, but because they create harmony. They are not swayed by emotion, they are guided by wisdom. And wisdom understands that respect is not a gift given only when deserved. It is a discipline that sustains peace. A man who feels respected naturally mirrors that energy. He begins to treat you with the same regard he feels from you. His tone softens, his patience expands, his trust deepens. Respect invites reciprocity. It teaches by example rather than instruction. And the respect you give becomes the respect you receive, multiplied through presence and sincerity. Love often depends on emotion, but respect depends on integrity. Emotion changes, integrity remains. Respect requires awareness of boundaries, both yours and his. It teaches you to love without invading, to care without controlling. It shows that the highest form of love is not to claim, but to honor. When you respect a man, you allow him to remain himself while still feeling connected to you. That balance between independence and unity is where devotion is born. Love may bring two hearts together, but respect keeps them aligned. It keeps communication pure, free of ego, free of competition. It allows space for both voices to be heard without needing to overpower the other. In that mutual respect, love becomes less about emotion and more about evolution. It becomes a space where both can grow without fear of judgment. Respect, in its truest form, is love made wise, love that listens, love that observes, love that uplifts without possession, love that endures even when emotion fluctuates, because it is built not on desire, but on reverence. In a world that constantly demands attention, movement, and noise, stillness becomes an act of power. It is not the absence of energy, it is the mastery of it. A still presence does not chase, does not convince, does not perform. It simply is, grounded, aware, and deeply alive beneath the surface. Stillness is not passive, it is magnetic. It draws others not through effort, but through the calm assurance that does not need to prove its worth. When a man encounters that stillness, something within him quiets too. He feels peace, not pressure. And it is in that peace that devotion begins to grow. Most people try to hold someone's attention through movement, through words, through emotions, through constant display. But attention gained through noise always fades. It burns brightly and dies quickly. Stillness, however, holds without effort. It creates a space that feels safe, steady, and sacred. A man becomes devoted not to what overwhelms him, but to what centers him. When he feels your stillness, the way you do not chase his validation, the way you do not crumble when he withdraws, the way your energy remains balanced, he begins to associate your presence with calm. And calm is what his restless spirit secretly longs for. Stillness does not mean silence of voice, it means silence of need. It means you no longer seek to prove your value through reaction or urgency. It means you understand that your energy, when aligned, speaks louder than any words could. When you are still within yourself, you stop reaching outward for reassurance. You stop trying to force connection. You begin to radiate something that can only be felt, not described. A kind of peace that says, I am whole whether you stay or go. That kind of peace makes a man trust you because he can feel that your stability is not dependent on him. It allows him to approach not from fear or guilt, but from genuine respect. A man feels safe to love where he feels he can breathe. If your presence feels like still air, not suffocating, not demanding, but calm and real, he unconsciously begins to return to it. Devotion is not a decision, it is a pull, an energy that draws him closer without words. Stillness is that energy. It is the quiet rhythm that reminds him of balance in a life full of pressure. In that stillness, his mind finds peace, his emotions find order, and his heart finds direction. The one who gives him that experience becomes unforgettable. Stillness invites devotion because it reflects inner mastery. It shows that you are not governed by emotion, that you can feel deeply without losing yourself in feeling. When you are still, you become aware of your thoughts, of your reactions, of your energy. You begin to move with intention instead of impulse. A man notices this. He senses that you are not reactive, that you do not try to control outcomes, that you can observe without panic. This steadiness teaches him something profound. Love does not have to be chaotic to be real. Love can exist in silence, in patience, in the quiet understanding that nothing forced will last. When you meet a man with stillness, you teach him that he can meet you in peace. You do not demand constant attention or validation, because your self-worth does not fluctuate with his moods. You do not try to hold him tightly when he pulls away, because you trust the natural rhythm of connection, the flow of closeness and distance that every relationship moves through. Stillness respects that rhythm. It knows that everything real returns on its own, that everything aligned does not need to be chased. And so you remain calm, rooted, and watchful. From that energy, devotion begins to form naturally, because your peace becomes his reminder of what love feels like when it is not built on control. The world often mistakes stillness for indifference, but indifference comes from disconnection, while stillness comes from mastery. Indifference says, I don't care. Stillness says, I trust. It is a higher state of awareness, where emotion no longer dictates behavior, where the external world cannot disturb the internal equilibrium. That is what makes it so powerful. When a man feels that you cannot be easily shaken, that you do not react to his tests or pull away in confusion, he begins to respect your strength. He begins to feel devotion not out of fear of losing you, but out of admiration for your self-possession. Stillness is also the space where intuition becomes clear. When the mind is quiet, you can sense truth beneath appearance. You no longer interpret every silence as rejection, every distance as disinterest. You can feel the difference between absence and reflection, between avoidance and peace. This clarity keeps you from reacting to illusion. It allows your actions to come from wisdom, not insecurity. And wisdom is what keeps love pure. The more still you become, the less chaos you create, and the more devotion naturally finds its way toward you. A man may be drawn to beauty, but he is devoted to peace. He may chase excitement, but he stays where he finds rest. Stillness offers that rest. It gives him permission to drop his guard, to breathe without performing, to feel without fear. When your energy is grounded, he begins to return, not because you demand it, but because he feels better in your presence than he does in your absence. That is devotion, the natural attraction toward balance, the quiet magnetism of peace. Stillness teaches through example. It shows that love can be soft yet strong, patient yet powerful. It teaches that emotion can move deeply without destroying calm. It shows that presence is more powerful than persuasion. You do not have to prove yourself to a person who can feel your energy. You do not have to speak loudly when your silence already communicates trust. Stillness allows space for another to step forward willingly rather than being pulled. And the steps taken toward you through choice, not pressure, create bonds that cannot easily break. In moments of conflict, stillness becomes the highest form of strength. Instead of reacting, you observe. Instead of shouting, you breathe. Instead of matching chaos, you remain composed. This does not mean you suppress your truth. It means you express it with clarity and calm. That calm becomes contagious. It diffuses tension, disarms defensiveness, and transforms the energy of the moment. A man remembers not just what you said, but how you made him feel. And when your stillness makes him feel safe in the storm, he begins to hold that memory as something sacred. Devotion grows in stillness because stillness holds mystery. It invites curiosity without anxiety. It makes a man wonder, not because you are unavailable, but because your energy cannot be owned. It belongs to something greater, to your own inner balance. And that balance becomes his reminder of what truth feels like. Stillness is not emptiness, it is fullness contained. It is emotional depth without chaos, passion without noise, strength without force. It is the space where love stops trying and begins simply to be. When you master stillness, you master attraction at its purest form. You stop trying to pull and instead learn how to receive. You stop reacting to absence and start radiating presence. You stop chasing love and start embodying it. That embodiment is what draws devotion, because the heart recognizes truth when it feels it, and stillness is the purest expression of truth in motion,